Hey there. Today I'd like to invite you to have a look at two paintings by Leonardo da Vinci with me. He's obviously most famous for the Mona Lisa, but I would like to look at two different paintings. Two Madonnas with child and one with Saint Anne. So let's see. So this is the first one I'd like to look at. It's from the early stages of Da Vinci's work. He was born in 1452 and lived until 1519. So that was the time of the High Renaissance. And he was active during the same time as Michelangelo or Raphael. And this is one of his early paintings. Here's the Madonna in a seated position in this closed room with the Christ child on her lap. And this is a composition that you might see quite often when you go to a museum. Here on the side you can see two Madonnas with child by Andrea del Verrocchio and his workshop. And that's basically the same composition that you see over here. So you have the Madonna seated, looking down towards the Christ child on her right hand side, with her left arm raised, holding, in this case, a flower, a red carnation. It's a symbolic flower that stands for the Passion of Christ. I really like the depiction of her face. She looks very young and very graceful, with her eyes lowered. And there's some beautiful detail up here. The braids in her hair. And this almost translucent veil with the beautiful golden edge. Falling down here over her shoulder. And finally draped over her arm. Then there's this beautiful red cloth underneath of her dress. And it's masterfully draped here. And a nice brooch at the middle. You can see some reflection of the light. And over her right shoulder you have this bright yellow fabric. And the Christ child looks very healthy and very realistic, I think. It's a little chubby. His chubby little arms. he's reaching out towards the flower. Still a bit clumsy. So when you compare this Christ child to this one here by Del Verrocchio, it's quite different. This one here appears as a baby, but the hand gestures and the posture, of course, look a lot more adult. And here you really see a small baby. Let's give him a little brushing here on the cheeks and across the head. So what's typical for the paintings of this time is that you can't really see the individual brushstrokes. There were some painters that worked a little differently, but overall these are more realistic, I guess, in that respect. They give you the illusion of just seamless color on canvas. There are some really gorgeous details, like here in the corner. There's a crystal vase. And you can see that it's almost just hinted at, so delicately drawn. You can see the reflections. And down here. But you can really tell that this is a see-through material that catches the light. So it's really, really beautiful. And the flowers here are also symbolic. They stand for Mary. Right, and then when we look at the background, we see that this room that appears to be quite dark opens up. 1, 2, 3, 4 windows with columns here in the middle. And we're looking at this quite typical landscape of the Renaissance. During the Middle Ages, painters would often put a gold background, for example. But in the Renaissance, they started to depict a world that they could see. And the Renaissance, starting in Italy, means that you can often see an Italian background. It almost looks like you're looking out into Tuscany sometimes. But in this case here, this looks a little more northern. Something that you would maybe expect in paintings from the Netherlands. really, really like this painting. I think there's a beautiful calmness to it, and I just adore the way this fabric looks. And you can also see this triangular composition that would become very, very typical for the Renaissance. Right, and then let's look at another rendition of Madonna with the child. There's the Mona Lisa. We want to go over here. So this looks a little different. It's one of the later works of Da Vinci. But it's not quite clear when it was made. It says here between 1502 and 1513, so that's quite a large gap here. And you can see that it's not in best condition. I don't know if it's been restored in the meantime. The book says that it was definitely up for restoration, but it wasn't yet clear when and how it will happen. This says the Virgin with the Child and with Saint Anne, and it was commissioned for a church in Florence, but is unfinished, and it was in the possession of Da Vinci. I think probably until the end. So you can see that the colors aren't quite as bright, especially here. This blue fabric looks a bit faded. But that's okay. It's a very old painting, after all. 500 years. So, this one's a bit odd, because at first glance it looks quite familiar with this triangular shape again, and the quite calm composition all in all. Wikipedia writes that it looks at once both pleasing, calm, yet confusing upon closer examination. And the confusing part is that Mary appears to be sitting on her mother's lap, but her mother must be a lot taller the way this is depicted. So there's something odd about the proportions. It's also an unusual composition because this was not something that was common at the time, to have Mary depicted on the lap of Saint Anne. So people don't really know whether it's meant to express something, maybe about their relation. And since no one really knows when it was painted and what the context was, it's hard to draw any conclusions. So there aren't really any historic parallels, but I like the interpretation that it almost looks like one body in two states of motion. What we see is the Virgin Mary reaching out towards the Christ child, who's playing with a lamb. You can see Jesus is looking a little older here, and he's got the ear of a little lamb. He's playing with it, which of course the lamb again stands for the Passion of Christ. So Mary tries to stop it and tries to separate them, while Anne tries to hinder Mary from doing that. Anne can be interpreted as the personification of the Church, which of course is interested in history proceeding as necessary to ensure the salvation of everyone. You can also see in the faces that there doesn't really seem to be much of a difference in age. Anne looks quite young, just like Mary. And there's an expression for that. Maria formitas, meaning that some aspect of Mary's appearance was transferred to Anne, to her mother, to emphasize her holiness too. What's also quite stunning is the landscape. Again, we are looking at the distant mountains, turning blue. Reaching up into the sky that probably too was blue once. Down here we see the rock layers in great detail. So this probably comes from Da Vinci's observations of nature. He had a theory that the mountains had once risen out of the ocean and that they kept rising, and that you could see that in these rock layers. So that's quite an accurate observation. The blue in the distance is a little faded, but that too was based on observations of nature. There's a little quote here in this book by Rebecca Solnit, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, that I really like. So Da Vinci wrote that when painting buildings, to make one appear more distant than another, you should represent the air as rather dense. Therefore, make the first building of its own color, the next more distant, make less outlined and more blue. That which you wish to show at yet another distance, make bluer yet again, and that which is 5 times more distant, make 5 times more blue. So you can see that here, that the mountains appear to be fading into the blue of the distance. There's another aspect about the painting that seems a bit strange, considering the mountains, the rock layers, the faces and gestures are so realistic. It looks like this is an alpine landscape. It's quite high up above the tree line, and yet here on the side we have this large tree. It could be a symbol for Anne, who became pregnant with Mary very late in her life. But there are also some interpretations that this strange landscape that almost seems untouched by nature is, as a whole, a symbol for the Virgin Mary and her virginity, for the Immaculate Conception. The way that this background is painted, the entire landscape, is something that also appeared in Marian prayers at the time. There's a little quote in Italian in this book. I don't know if it's directly from Da Vinci, but translated it says something like, curtain of skies, cloudless sky, light air, fragrant spring, luminous clouds, splendid and clear, serene, pure morning, which gives rain, full of dew, which tempers the adoring sun, which rises from the vapor of moisture, which rises to the skies for the heat of the true sun. It sounds very nice, but it's an automatic translation, so I'm sorry if some of that was a bit odd. There's some poetic license by the artificial intelligence. So this valley, this wildness of nature, is still a place that is very pleasant. There's water, it's not too hot, something that is inviting. It's a promise, basically. And to finish here, I'd like to read you a little more from this chapter about this part here in the distance that once was blue. The world is blue at its edges and in its depths. Just blue is the light that got lost. Light at the blue end of the spectrum does not travel the whole distance from the sun to us. It disperses among the molecules of the air. It scatters in water. Water is colorless. Shallow water appears to be the color of whatever lies underneath it, but deep water is full of this scattered light. The purer the water, the deeper the blue. The sky is blue for the same reason, but the blue at the horizon, the blue of land that seems to be dissolving into the sky, is a deeper, dreamy, a melancholy blue, the blue at the farthest reaches of the places where you see for miles, the blue of distance. This light that does not touch us, does not travel the whole distance, the light that gets lost, gives us the beauty of the world, so much of which is in the color blue. For many years, I have been moved by the blue at the far edge of what can be seen, that color of horizons, of remote mountain ranges, of anything far away. The color of that distance is the color of an emotion, the color of solitude and of desire, the color of there seen from here, the color of where you are not, and the color of where you can never go. For the blue is not in the place those miles away at the horizon, but in the atmospheric distance between you and the mountains. Longing, says the poet Robert Huss, because desire is full of endless distances. Blue is the color of longing for the distances you never arrive in, for the blue world. We treat desire as a problem to be solved. Address what desire is for and focus on that something and how to acquire it rather than on the nature and on the sensation of this desire. So often it is in the distance between us and the object of desire that fills the space in between with the blue of longing. I wonder sometimes whether with a slight adjustment of perspective it could be cherished as a sensation on its own terms, since it is as inherent to the human condition as blue is to distance. If you can look across the distance without wanting to close it up, if you can own your longing in the same way that you own the beauty of that blue that can never be possessed. For something of this longing will, like the blue of distance, only be relocated, not assuaged, by acquisition and arrival, just as the mountains cease to be blue when you arrive among them, and the blue instead tints the next beyond.